for the simple reason that the discussion related to the present condition, not to future possibility. My point would be better understood if I extend the comparison and say that my 5-year-old grandson or my 68-year-old wife can no more understand the presentation than my cow, though both my wife and my grandson are objects of tender care and affection. And I would say of myself that I can no more read the Chinese alphabet today than my worshipful cow. Unquote. So let me move now to the final section of my lecture on cow protection. So just to recap what I've said so far. Gandhi is very distrustful of universality and the universality of the human race because he thinks it comes out of imperialism and imperialism's expansion by way of technology. He uses caste as a model of thinking about what I'm calling the non-universal, and to belabor a point that I've made before, he mentions sexual and commensal sharing critically. When talking about conversion, he shifts to a critique of universality in terms of absorption of other religions into a single one, and goes further in casting doubt upon communication itself, a fundamental category of thinking about humanity. So specious as it appears to be, the Mahatma's excuse for comparing Dalits to cows was indeed part of his more general understanding about the limits of humanity. As with his views on caste and conversion, Gandhi's advocacy of cow protection presupposed the unity of all life, but without invoking its universality. In fact, cow protection was more important than caste or religious plurality because it extended moral life beyond the human species. As he put it in an article published in Young India in 1927, quote, "Hinduism believes in the oneness not of merely all human life, but in the oneness of all that lives. Its worship of the cow is, in my opinion, its unique contribution to the evolution of humanitarianism. It is a practical application of the belief in the oneness and therefore sacredness of all life. The great belief in transmigration is a direct consequence of that belief," unquote. And of course the reference to transmigration refers to the fact that in previous or future births, there is, it's not a universalistic kind of sharing, but there is the possibility of a, if you will, a single soul moving from the animal to the human kingdom, backwards into the plant, etc. If in the context of religious diversity, humanitarianism meant sacrificing for others without seeking to share an identity with them, in that of cow protection, this meaning was made both clear and inevitable, since the oneness of life depended upon a denial of communicability, commensality, and of course sexual congress. You can't have any of those things with a cow. Indeed, for the Mahatma, humanitarianism could be fulfilled paradoxically only by moving beyond the species. Already in 1921, he had written in Young India that cow protection was the chief doctrine of Hinduism, quote, "The central fact of Hinduism, however, is cow protection. Cow protection to me is one of the most wondrous phenomena in human evolution. It takes the human being beyond his species. The Hindu is enjoined to realize his identity with all that lives. Why the cow was selected for apotheosis is obvious to me. The cow was in India the best companion. She was the giver of plenty. Not only did she give milk, but she also made agriculture possible. The cow is a poem of pity. One reads pity in the gentle animal. She is the mother to millions of Indian mankind. Protection of the cow means protection of the whole dumb creation of God. The ancient seer, whoever he was, began with the cow. The appeal of the lower order of creation is all the more forcible because it is speechless. Cow protection is the gift of Hinduism to the world, and Hinduism will live so long as there are Hindus to protect the cow." So notice that incommunicability is made crucial here. You cannot communicate with the cow. The cow cannot speak to you. But that is what makes a moral relationship possible, by moving beyond your species. And of course, it's another way of thinking what I've described in earlier passages of this lecture. How Hindus and Muslims can support each other without believing in what the other believes in, without sharing. How caste prescriptions, which prescribe sharing, can actually, he thinks, it might not be correct in so thinking, end up in creating a new form of moral relationship. Precisely because she had no language, in other words, the cow, like religion itself, called out to human beings to urge them beyond themselves. And yet this call was silent or removed from the logic of communication and not part of any such exchange, even with the cow, which, like the Dalit and many other human beings, was defined as by a kind of radical ignorance. Or as Gandhi put it in the 1924 issue of Young India, quote, "The cow is the purest type of subhuman life. She pleads before us on behalf of the whole of the subhuman species for justice to it at the hands of man, the first among all that lives. She seems to speak to us through her eyes. You are not appointed over us to kill us and eat our flesh or otherwise ill-treat us, but to be our friend and guardian," unquote. But just as the universality of mankind was held back from any positive instantiation by the differences of caste and religion, so too the cow and subhuman life in general could on no account be made equivalent to human existence. He never says that there's an equivalence. In fact, it was only because the cow was inferior to or weaker than the human being, the first among all that lives, that he could sacrifice himself for her, which according to Gandhi was the only form cow protection could take. Cow protection only meant sacrificing yourself for the cow. And this was true of sacrifice as a moral principle in general, which for Gandhi was a sovereign act because it was unilateral and made not in the name of some higher entity like God or the state, but only for those, animal or human, who required protection, often without possessing a language and so relations in common. Peculiar though her protection was to Hinduism, for Gandhi the cow nevertheless took on many different roles that allowed her to link Hindus with Muslims, Christians, and others. For one thing, she served as a kind of equal to, but not equivalent of, the defining creeds, books, or founders of the monotheistic faiths. As the Mahatma put it to a cow protection conference in 1925, quote, "It may be that we may not be all able to agree as to the exact meaning and significance of cow protection. For Hinduism does not rest on the authority of one book or one prophet, nor does it possess a common creed like the Kalma of Islam, acceptable to all. That renders a common definition of Hinduism a bit difficult, but therein lies strength also. For it is this special feature that has given to Hinduism its inclusive and assimilative character and made its gradual silent evolution possible. Go to any Hindu child and he would tell you that cow protection is the supreme duty of every Hindu, and that anyone who does not believe in it hardly deserves the name of a Hindu," unquote. But more than this, the cow even became an equal of the caliph, with Gandhi saying to the same conference that, quote, "I have been telling Maulana Shaukat Ali all along that I was helping him to save his cow, i.e. the Khilafat, because I hope to save my cow thereby. I am prepared to place my life in the hands of the Muslims to live merely on their sufferance. Why? Simply that I might be able to protect the cow. I hope to achieve the end not by entering into a bargain with the Muslims, but by bringing about a change of heart in them. So long as this is not done, I hold my soul in patience. For I have not a shadow of doubt in my mind that such a change of heart can be brought about only by our own correct conduct towards them and by our personal example," unquote. Indeed, he had already claimed that the Muslims' caliphate was not just the equal of the Hindu's cow, but even the reverse, that it was in fact the Hindu's cow as well. Quote, "The Hindu's participation in the Khilafat is the greatest and the best movement for cow protection. I have therefore called Khilafat our Kawadok, our wishing cow." So it's a very interesting thing. There's no sharing, but you have this situation in which the caliph can become a cow and the cow can become the caliph. and all without any shared belief. If the caliph and the cow were equals despite being utterly unlike each other, this was itself an illustration of Gandhi's criticism of similarity and similitude as defining factors in the making of universality. It was precisely because they were so different, therefore, that the cow and the caliph could enter into a moral rather than merely materialistic relationship of kin and kind. So this is, of course, simply another way, yet another way, of criticizing the idea of universality, which depends upon sharing similarity, similitude, things that look alike, things that belong together biologically or in some other fashion through communication. Refusing to describe such a relationship in contractual terms as a quid pro quo, the Mahatma focused instead on the unconditional sacrifice that made friendship and thus cow protection possible. So he told his audience at the Cow Protection Conference in Belgaum that suffering for the cow without either coercion or contract was an exemplary way of forging a moral relationship. Quote, "Cow slaughter and manslaughter are, in my opinion, two sides of the same coin, and the remedy for both is identical, i.e. that we develop the ahimsa principle and endeavor to win over our opponent by love. The test of love is tapasya, and tapasya means suffering. I offer to share with the Muslims their suffering to the best of my capacity, not merely because I wanted their cooperation for winning Swaraj, but also because I had in mind the object of saving the cow. The Quran, so far as I have been able to understand it, declares it to be a sin to take the life of any living being without cause. I want to develop the capacity to convince the Muslims that to kill the cow is practically to kill their fellow countrymen and friends, the Hindus. The Quran says that there can be no heaven for one who sheds the blood of an innocent neighbor." Instead of abstaining from cow slaughter only out of consideration for Hindu feelings, therefore, the sacrifice Gandhi promoted would allow Muslims to see the cow herself as equal to but not interchangeable with their Hindu neighbors. Such an enterprise, of course, demanded sacrifices from both parties and gave no moral priority to Hindus, especially if they stooped to coercion and violence to gain their end. The struggle over cow protection, therefore, like that over the caliphate, was capable of uplifting both communities simultaneously, and this is why it also served as a precondition for Swaraj or freedom itself. Quote, "I hold the question of cow protection to be not less momentous, but in certain respects even of far greater moment than that of Swaraj. I would even go so far as to say that just as so long as Hindu-Muslim unity is not affected, Hinduism not purged of the taint of untouchability, and the wearing of hand-spun and hand-woven khadar does not become universal, Swaraj would be impossible of attainment. Even so, the term Swaraj would be devoid of all meaning so long as we have not found a way of saving the cow. For that is the touchstone on which Hinduism must be tested and proven before there can be any real Swaraj." Unquote. Although they had no moral priority over their Muslim neighbors, Hindu advocates of cow protection nevertheless shouldered the duty of initiating a non-violent movement for their cause, just as Muslims had for the caliphate. Cow protection was therefore primarily a test for its Hindu proponents, which was why Gandhi placed so much emphasis on the purity of their motives and means. He repeatedly pointed out, for instance, that while the British and Indian Christians, to say nothing of Dalits and many tribal groups, also slaughtered cattle and ate beef, it was Muslims who bore the brunt of Hindu opprobrium. But to single out Muslims was also to reveal their perverted intimacy with Hindus, since the eating habits of those considered strangers as well as superiors and inferiors didn't give rise to the same feelings of offense. Only the Muslims caused offense. And for Gandhi, this is a perverse sign of the intimacy of Hindus and Muslims. And so the Mahatma's task was to return this sense of intimacy to its virtuous origins by spiritualizing cow protection rather than limiting or simply condemning its excesses. Other signs that the advocates of cow protection hadn't yet purified their aims included their oblivion to the cruelty with which many Hindus treated cattle, as well as the generally deplorable condition of cow shelters. And it was only once they addressed such issues that Gandhi thought supporters of cow protection had the moral right to ask Muslims to sacrifice for them. So the moral obligation depended upon Hindus, they had to stop, they had to themselves treat cows and cow shelters in a more appropriate way. They could not stoop to violence to achieve their means. Their means had to be proven pure. It was only after that that Muslims might be asked to abandon cow slaughter. In fact, they could not be asked at all. They would have to simply arrive at it upon witnessing the non-violent and loving sacrifice of their neighbors. Because he thought cow protection embodied the principle of non-violence, Gandhi considered any attempt to establish it violently as being equal to cow slaughter and beef eating. He told his audience at the conference on cow protection that they ran the risk of falling into the very sins they ostensibly abhorred by seeking to enforce their views through brute compulsion or even majority-defined law. Quote, unfortunately, today we seem to believe that the problem of cow protection consists merely in preventing non-Hindus, especially Muslims, from beef eating and cow killing. That seems to me to be absurd. Let no one, however, conclude from this that I am indifferent when a non-Hindu kills a cow or that I can bear the practice of cow killing. On the contrary, no one probably experiences a greater agony of the soul when a cow is killed. But what am I to do? Am I to fulfill my dharma myself, or am I to get it fulfilled by proxy? Of what avail would be my preaching brahmacharya to others if I am at the same time steeped in vice myself? How can I ask Muslims to desist from eating beef when I eat it myself? But supposing even that I myself do not kill the cow, is it any part of my duty to make the Muslims against his will do likewise? Muslims claim that Islam permits them to kill the cow. To make a Muslim, therefore, to abstain from cow killing under compulsion would amount to, in my opinion, to converting him to Hinduism by force. Very interesting, because it returns to what I was saying about Gandhi's views on conversion, that this would simply be a forcible form of conversion. Even in India, under Swaraj, in my opinion, it would be for a Hindu majority unwise and improper to coerce by legislation a Muslim minority into submission to statutory prohibition of cow slaughter, unquote. Instead of seeing it as a problem or prejudice that had somehow to be sublimated into a form of virtue, the Mahatma understood cow protection, like the caliphate, caste, or conversion, as offering an extraordinary opportunity to set in place a society defined by non-violent moral relations. So, he's a conservative in many ways. He deals with what already exists. In this case, cow slaughter and cow protection, or caste, or conversion. These are all issues that pre-exist the Mahatma. And his task is to work on them. He's in that sense not an idealist at all. He works only with what exists. These relations, however, were premised not upon some universal humanity made up of biological and other similarities, which he considered false in its promise, but founded on a non-universality that could accommodate singularity, particularity, and difference without being reduced to any of these. This is why the equality that Gandhi invoked against such conventionally ascribed or given similarities tended to be so eccentric and insubordinate to the logic of human universality. For if the cow and the caliph could trade places, it was not because they resembled each other in any way, but rather did not. This is what made their relationship a truly moral one. And the same went for the equality between the cow and the Islamic creed, or compelling Muslims to abandon cow slaughter and eating beef. Right? To compel Muslims to abandon cow slaughter would be equivalent to a Hindu eating beef, or to convert them by force to Hinduism. So he makes these very interesting comparisons, which are based on non-similarity, on non-sharing. By moving outside the species, Gandhi was able to make humanity, or rather what he called humanitarianism, into something whose reality was possible only beyond the bounds of mankind. But he did so without affirming the unity of life at some higher level either, and thus deferred its universality infinitely, instead of trying to set it aside for a particularity that would simply have brought it back by the back door. Gandhi often described perfection or the moral ideal more generally in this kind of way, as being like a Euclidean postulate whose non-existence only made the efforts to realize it infinite. Such a reality, as human or even animal life possessed, therefore, was itself only possible by way of the particularity that limited and indeed had priority over it in the language of Swadeshi. So let me come to my conclusion. Responding in a 1926 issue of Young India to a doctor who had criticized his views on non-violence by stressing the animal nature of man, the Mahatma pointed out that the more general category of animal could have no meaning without the particularity of species. Quote, "Hitherto one has been told to believe that a species is recognized and differentiated from the rest by its special characteristics. Therefore, it would be wrong, I presume, to say that a horse is animal first and horse after. He shares something in common with the other animals, but he dare not shed his horseliness and yet remain an animal. Having lost his special virtue, he loses his general status. Similarly, if man lost his status as man and began to grow a tail and walk on all fours, lost the use of his hands, and more than that, lost the use of his reason, would he not lose with the loss of his status as man, his status also as an animal? I would suggest to the medical friend that man can be classed as an animal only so long as he retains his humanity." Unquote. As both category and reality, therefore, the generality of animal life depended upon the particularity of species being rather than the reverse, which is to say that life, whether animal or human, could only possess a non-universal status. Gandhi's correspondent had also suggested that he should own up to man's relationship with other creatures more fulsomely, to which the Mahatma replied that it was precisely his acknowledgement of such a relationship in advocating non-violence or cow protection, for example, which made it a non-reciprocal one. Quote, "The correspondent apologizes for suggesting that I might regard myself as a remote cousin of the ape. The truth is that my ethics not only permit me to claim, but require me to own kinship with not merely the ape, but the horse and the sheep, the lion and the leopard, the snake and the scorpion. Not so need these kinfolk regard themselves. The hard ethics which rule my life, and I hold ought to rule that of every man and woman, imposes this unilateral obligation upon us. And it is so imposed because man alone is man made in the image of God." Unquote. So, man can acknowledge his relationship to animals. The animal is not bound or obliged to acknowledge its relationship to man. Moral action is unilateral. It's not about sharing. It's not about communication. It's not about any of those things. As with the relations of caste and religion, therefore, the one between man and animal was sovereign because unilateral. While recognizing biological and other forms of relations among men or between them and animals, Gandhi was clear that to become moral ones, they had to repudiate the kind of reciprocity made possible by sex, commensality, occupation, or language. For like animals, many human beings had no words, or indeed ability to communicate. Though unlike them, this was at least in part due to the fact that Dalits, women or children had not yet become the equals of caste Hindus, men and adults. Their loss of language was a structural thing. Without denying the value of conversation or dialogue, in other words, Gandhi sought to foreground the importance of sacrifice as a sovereign and so unilateral act that was humanitarian because removed from ordinary human relationships. To sacrifice for the cow, then, represented the highest form of human duty. Thank you.
Okay, friends and colleagues, I am not a Gandhian because God does not want repetition. Each of us is unique, and I always believe that it's like living like a tiny blue flower, blooming for a couple of days, fulfilling one's own specific, distinctive shadharma, and disappearing and merging with the ultimate void. I'm lucky, like all of you, because this is a beautiful evening. I'm familiar with Professor's writings, but for the first time, I get an opportunity to meet him, to converse with him, and like all of you, get the privilege of listening to him, an absolutely brilliant paper and presentation with profound scholarship and a very nuanced, subtle argumentations, and which emerge from the primary philosophic proposition with which he began, that Gandhi's engagement with the universal without allowing himself to be subordinated by it, because the particular too is part of the universal. With this philosophic argumentation, there are three central issues that he coped with. Primarily, the caste question, the second, the religious conversation, and the third, the cow protection. These are the very three important issues that any student of Gandhi begin to negotiate with and engage with. And with powerful argumentation, complex, subtle, philosophically enriched, he looked at these three questions and let all of us think and reflect. We'll take some time to internalize it, to look at it, to digest it. Possibly all of us have to read his paper, once again with much care, to go deeper into the subtlety of his argumentations. As I have said, that God doesn't like repetition, so I believe that you do not want me to repeat what Professor has already said and said so brilliantly and written a very brilliant paper. So I will speak his language, nor should I make an attempt to summarize what he has said. Instead, what I would try to do, I would try to first contextualize this entire discourse today and at which time in India's political and cultural history we are here and talking about Gandhi's engagement with humanity and Hinduism. That sense of history and the contextualization I would propose is absolutely important. And second, I believe that while religious conversion, cow protection, and caste question are very important while we refer to Gandhi's engagement with Hinduism, but these alone do not encompass Gandhi's very enriched, complex engagement with Hinduism. In that context, I would love to throw some light on Gandhi's engagement with Hinduism, particularly in the context of comparing Gandhi with some major cultural innovators who worked with Hinduism, critiqued Hinduism, and engaged with Hinduism. That comparative reading possibly would enable us to throw more light on that. So the first part, when we contextualize this today's discussion, a very beautiful discussion, I believe that all of us, as students of political history in India today, see there are primarily four ways through which we see the social context in which the debate on Hinduism is carried today. One, which all of us are familiar with, the ruling political ideology as some sort of militarized, masculinist, hyper-masculinist, militarized, assertive Hindutva with its characteristics of militant cultural nationalism, oppressive majoritarianism. This is, for example, an loud symbolism. So oppressive majoritarianism, militant cultural nationalism, and loud symbolism manifesting itself in the ruling political ideology of a very hyper-masculinist, militarized Hindutva.